They fined me $450 for unauthorized deck repair, even though the deck was still half rotted from their own contractor's job. The notice came with a photo of my hammer on the railing and a threat of lien within 15 days. That's when I decided to start documenting everything, every nail, every board, every breath they took on my property. Welcome to HOA Society. I'm Daniel Kerrigan from Henderson County, North Carolina. Civil engineer, widower, and apparently the only man in Birchwood Lake Estates who still believes bylaws mean what they say. If you're new here, I tell real HOA stories the way they actually happen, with the paper trail intact. If you're already part of the community, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? My wife, Lisa, died 3 years ago. Heart valve failure at 43. The cabin by the lake was the one thing we built together, plank by plank, 2 summers before she passed. I kept it exactly as she liked. The cedar smell, the hummingbird feeder, her blue kayak tied to the dock. That place isn't just wood and nails, it's the promise I made to her. So when the HOA started calling it a visual liability, something in me locked into place. It began with the president, Margaret Hensley, striding across my gravel drive in those impossible wedge heels. She pointed at the faded shutters, clipboard trembling with righteous purpose. "You signed the covenant," she said. "Our standards protect property values." Behind her, 2 board members nodded like church ushers. I asked if she'd read Section 7.3, maintenance exemptions during contracted repairs, but she just sniffed and said, "You engineers love loopholes." That's when I realized this wasn't about siding, it was about control. They slapped citations faster than a meter maid on overtime. Grass length, mailbox color, even unauthorized birdhouse placement. I paid the first 2 to stay out of trouble, but when they threatened to file a lien for the deck, I pulled the county file. Every permit in Birchwood Lake ran through my office once upon a time. I knew what was on record, and more important, what wasn't. I started keeping a ledger. Dates, times, photos. 7:42 a.m. May 3rd. Margaret's husband peering over my fence with a tape measure. 6:15 p.m. May 5th. Anonymous Facebook post about unsafe structures tagged to my address. 9 o'clock a.m. May 7th. Hand-delivered notice citing non-compliant exterior stain. Same day I'd stained the deck to HOA-approved color 42B, warm chestnut. I compared it under daylight. It matched within 1% reflectance. The pettiness almost amused me until I saw what they did to Mrs. Delgado, the retired librarian next door. She'd installed a wheelchair ramp for her husband after his stroke. They fined her $600 for unapproved modification. That night I promised her I'd find a way to stop them, for both our homes. I still remember the smell of copier toner when I pulled the master plan set from the county archive. 12 pages, stamped and sealed 2006. And there it was. A marginal note. Phase 3 Common Easement, parcel number 1187B. That was my backlot. The patch of pine trees behind the deck they claimed was HOA property. But the note said private maintenance easement only, not ownership. It meant the HOA's jurisdiction ended 3 feet short of my deck post. I didn't show anyone. Not yet. I needed proof of misuse, not just boundary bragging. So I waited, logged, watched. Every time they crossed that invisible line, I wrote it down like a scientist noting contamination. By June 1st, the folder weighed 3 pounds. Violation letters, photographs, emails, all labeled by timestamp. My friend and ally, Jerome Fletcher, a city inspector with coffee breath and ink-stained cuffs, stopped by. After work, he flipped through the papers and whistled. "Selective enforcement," he said. "If they're hitting you for color while ignoring others, that's a violation under state statute." Knowledge nugget number 1. In North Carolina, an HOA can't enforce rules selectively. Uniform application is required, or the fine is voidable under GS 47F3107.1. I thanked him, but my eyes were already on the lake. Margaret's reflection shimmered in the water as she marched along the opposite dock, clipboard in hand. I could almost hear her voice echoing across, "We have standards, Mr. Kerrigan." The thing about standards is, they cut both ways. That night I sat at the table, the deck light humming with mosquitoes, and wrote a simple line in my notebook. Find their weak clause. Because every HOA, like every dam I've ever inspected, leaks somewhere. You just need to know where the pressure builds. The next morning I brewed coffee thick as asphalt, folded Lisa's old blanket over the chair, and opened a new file labeled Phase 3 Operations. Inside would grow the case that either freed my home or buried me under paperwork thicker than cement. And somewhere beyond the tree line, Margaret's husband's camera clicked again, capturing what he thought was a man on defense. He had no idea I'd already started building the counterweight. Jerome's visit changed everything. He wasn't just a friend, he was my quiet mirror. Don't let it become personal vengeance, he told me that evening while balancing his thermos on my porch rail. You want it on record, not in rumor. I promised him I'd stay lawful, but when someone trespasses on what's left of your marriage, it's already personal whether you admit it or not. 3 days later, I walked into the HOA office with my camera glasses rolling and a manila folder under my arm. The secretary, young and clearly overworked, looked up like I was bringing in a lawsuit. Maybe I was, eventually. Records request, I said, handing her the sheet I'd printed from state statute. She read the line aloud. All homeowners have the right to inspect MIEs, INUTs, budgets, and contracts upon reasonable notice. The way her eyes darted told me she knew that wasn't common practice here. Margaret appeared from her glass office like she'd smelled smoke. "Mr. Kerrigan, this isn't necessary," she said. "We're transparent." "Then it'll take you 5 minutes," I replied. She pursed her lips, the way people do when they realize they've already lost the first round. Still, she tried. "Some documents contain sensitive financial information. That's why the statute lets you redact account numbers," I said, smiling. "Not deny access." That afternoon I sat under the hum of fluorescent lights, leafing through 3 years of meeting minutes and vendor invoices. The deeper I went, the louder the inconsistencies hummed. Payments without signatures. Landscaping bids 20% over market. And one odd line item buried in 2022's ledger. Phase 3 Lake Path Maintenance, $18,750. The lake path didn't exist. There was no path. Just my backyard, fenced and mowed by me for 12 years. My thumb hovered over my phone. A photo from May 12th, Margaret's husband and another board member pacing that same strip with measuring wheels. They'd billed the HOA for maintenance on my property. That was the first real crack in the dam. On my way out, I caught Margaret's husband, Ron, leaning against the hall, arms crossed. "You think you're the sheriff here, Dan?" he said. His voice had that half-drunken rasp of a man who spent too long believing himself untouchable. "You're poking at things you don't understand." I paused. "You're right," I said, but I read fast. When I got home, the sun was bleeding out behind the pines and my phone pinged. Another violation email. This one claimed excessive lighting visible from lake. I laughed out loud. They were policing photons now. The next morning I saw the violation count had reached 8. 8 citations in 14 days. I built a chart, dates on the left, regulation numbers on the right, and notes about every neighbor who'd violated the same rule. Out of 22 properties, 12 had identical conditions and 0 warnings. Selective enforcement, quantified. It's strange how numbers can steady you. Once I saw the pattern, my anger turned surgical. I started the dig for real. Property deeds, plat maps, and HOA filings at the county clerk's office. Old ink, faint stamps, the scent of paper dust. By the time the clerk rolled out the microfilm spool, my hands smelled like toner again. "You sure you want all of Birchwood's filings?" she asked. "That's about 4 inches thick." "I'm building a dam," I said. She blinked, but let me have the copies. In those pages, I found the keystone, a clause labeled Assignment of Maintenance Rights, Phase 3 Common Area. It wasn't recorded until 2015, 9 years after the development plat. And the signature wasn't from the original developer. It was from Margaret Hensley, HOA President, notarized by her husband. Conflict of interest, plain as a fence post. Knowledge nugget number 2. Under most state nonprofit statutes, any board member with a financial or familial conflict must recuse from votes involving that interest, or the contract is voidable and can trigger fiduciary penalties. I called Jerome. "I think I found the switch," I told him. "Don't flip it yet," he warned. "Let them pile weight on it first." So I stayed quiet. Instead of confronting them, I filed another record request: budget drafts, bid proposals, internal emails. It was bait, and they took it. Within 48 hours, I received a cease and desist letter accusing me of harassment for excessive inquiries. They'd copied the HOA attorney, a man named Palmer who loved to cite half-statutes, without sources. That letter made my case stronger. Retaliation for lawful record requests is a violation under state open access law. The irony was delicious. 2 evenings later, as I walked back from the mailbox, a sheriff's cruiser slowed by my drive. The deputy rolled down his window. "We got a wellness check call," he said, looking puzzled. "Said you were acting erratic." I smiled, handed him a copy of the cease and desist. "I'm fine, officer. Just erratically reading public records." He chuckled and left. Behind him, I could see Ron's porch light flick on. If you've ever faced an HOA that oversteps, you know that moment when you stop being scared and start collecting evidence like currency. That's where I was. Part anger, part accountant. Let me ask you this. Are you firmly against HOAs that weaponize bylaws, or do you think some power's necessary to keep order? If you've dealt with one, drop your short tactic below so the rest of us can learn. If not, leave your message for the HOA lurkers who always read the comments. They know who they are. By mid-July, my file box had colored tabs. Green for violations, red for correspondence, yellow for financials. It clicked shut with a satisfying snap, like the sound of a gavel striking. I'd built my wall, and now I needed the first crack from their side. On the 15th, Margaret sent a certified letter declaring an emergency hearing to discuss potential suspension of privileges. Translation: they wanted to ban me from using the boat ramp or clubhouse. The notice claimed my behavior was destabilizing the community. I smiled because they'd just given me an open meeting, public record, recorded minutes, and by law, an opportunity to speak. That night I laid out the documents like a chessboard. Lisa's photo watched from the mantel as I whispered, "Almost there, love." And in the silence after, I heard a low creak from the deck outside, the sound of someone stepping where they shouldn't. I didn't turn on the lights right away. The moon was enough to trace the silhouette through the curtain. Broad shoulders, camera strap, the faint metallic glint of a flash. Ron again, doing his midnight rounds like he owned the place. I slid open the door just enough for the sensor light to trigger. The beam caught him mid-step, frozen, deer-eyed. "You're trespassing," I said evenly. "The easement stops 3 feet behind you." He grunted something about community safety and retreated, gravel crunching beneath his boots. I watched his taillights fade, then checked my watch, 11:47 p.m., and wrote it down. The next morning, I called my attorney friend, Elise Tran, who handled municipal land disputes. She had that calm tone that makes bureaucrats nervous. "Documented trespass by a board member?" she said. "That's better than coffee." I told her about the fake maintenance charges and the self-notarized signature. She exhaled slowly. "You're sitting on fiduciary misconduct, Dan. Don't go nuclear yet. Quietly confirm with the bank where HOA funds are held. See who's authorized to sign." At noon, I walked into First Carolina's Credit Union, where the HOA's operating account lived. I still knew half the staff from my engineering contracts. The manager, Ms. Ortiz, recognized me and checked the signature card under confidentiality. "It's public for non-profit entities," she assured. "Authorized signatories, Margaret Hensley and Ronald Hensley." Husband and wife. That was all I needed. Knowledge nugget number 3. Under nonprofit corporate law, dual control of funds by related parties without independent oversight violates basic fiduciary separation and can void the association's insurance bond. I left the bank with my pulse steady. The plan was forming, slow, legal, surgical. But before I could pull the next thread, retaliation kicked in harder. By week's end, I'd received 2 anonymous complaints to county code enforcement claiming unpermitted structural changes on my property. Then, a letter from the HOA attorney alleging I'd created a hostile environment. They even photoshopped a picture of my deck light on at 2 a.m. and called it disturbing neighbors. The pettiness was Olympic level. I started a new section in the binder titled Harassment Chronology. They wanted fear. Instead, they got records. The worst part was seeing Mrs. Delgado cry again. They'd sent her a lien notice this time, $1,020 in fines for the ramp, plus legal costs. I told her to give me copies of everything. They can't touch your house without a 30-day pre-lien notice, I said. You have rights. She pressed a trembling hand to my wrist. You remind me of my son, she whispered. He used to fight for people too. That night, I stared at Lisa's photo and remembered her laugh when we first poured the deck foundation. Everything you build, she'd said, make sure it can outlast the storms. So I doubled down. I hired an independent surveyor out of my own pocket to map the property line using GPS. The results came back. The HOA's lake path easement extended exactly 2.6 feet onto my soil. Not enough to justify their maintenance charge, but enough to prove encroachment. I filed a quiet title affidavit at the courthouse and waited. Then came the meeting. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and nervous sweat. 30 homeowners filled the folding chairs, murmuring as Margaret called the session to order. Her voice dripped with authority. Tonight's agenda concerns a resident whose conduct has compromised our community cohesion. She didn't use my name, but every eye found me anyway. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, buttoned my jacket, and carried the red-tabbed binder to the front. Before we discuss cohesion, I said, I'd like to submit evidence of financial irregularities, selective enforcement, and trespass. Margaret tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. Per Section 5.3 of our bylaws, homeowners have 3 minutes to present matters affecting association integrity. I clicked a remote and projected the scanned documents onto the wall, the 2015 assignment, the bank authorization, the $18,750 invoice. Gasps rippled through the room. Ron rose, red-faced. This is defamation. I smiled. It's notarized defamation then, since that's your signature. The crowd stirred. Even the vice president shifted uneasily. I handed copies to the secretary, who hesitated before stapling them into the minutes. That act alone turned them into public record. And just when I thought they'd adjourn in chaos, Margaret composed herself. Mr. Kerrigan, she said, you're misunderstanding administrative necessity. Some decisions require executive discretion. I leaned closer to the mic. Executive discretion doesn't include falsifying easement expenses or notarizing your spouse's contract. Silence. Then murmurs again, this time sharper, angrier, against her. After the meeting, Jerome caught up with me outside. You just cracked the dam, brother, he said. Now wait for the water. Let me throw a question out to you, any of you watching. How far should an HOA control what's on your porch, your lawn, or your deck? Where's the line between community order and private tyranny? I'd love to read your thoughts. 2 nights later, retaliation escalated to vandalism. My mailbox was smashed. The post bent like a snapped limb. The next morning, a citation appeared taped to the debris. Mailbox height non-compliant. They'd fined me $50 for damage they caused. That was when fear finally flickered, not for the fines, but for escalation. I installed cameras, 2 visible, 1 hidden. The hidden one caught something unexpected. Ron again, with a flashlight and clipboard, pacing my driveway at 1:23 a.m. But this time, he wasn't alone. Margaret followed, taking photos of my front door. That clip became Exhibit 23. By August, the HOA sent a certified notice threatening suspension of water privileges. My lot didn't even use HOA-managed water. It was on a private well. I realized they weren't reading bylaws anymore. They were improvising intimidation. I began drafting my formal complaint to the State Department of Justice, Community Association Division. Jerome proofread it with his black pen tapping. Elise reviewed the attachments, murmuring, "This will scare their insurer." And then she smiled, small but real. "Dan, you've got enough to negotiate leverage. Ever consider buying it?" I blinked. Buying what? The debt. Associations carry liens and notes. They're assets on paper. If you find one past due loan, you can purchase the note through a trust and become their creditor. The idea hit me like a slow fuse. Control through ownership, not confrontation. I started digging into their financial filings that night, coffee going cold beside the keyboard. Somewhere in those spreadsheets was the hidden wire that would make the whole structure hum my tune. The next 72 hours blurred into a haze of search bars, PDF downloads, and late-night calls with Elise. I'd never imagined myself poring over amortization tables at 2 in the morning, But obsession has its own caffeine. Buried inside the HOA's 2020 annual disclosure, line 42, was a curious note. Operating loan, Birchwood Lake Community Improvement, $62,000 balance, Bank of Western Carolinas. The document even listed a maturity date, September 1st, just 6 weeks away. Elise leaned over my screen the next morning, hair pulled back, reading glasses low on her nose. If that loan's still outstanding, and if they missed even one payment, the bank might sell the note at a discount. You could acquire it through an LLC and become their secured creditor. I nodded slowly. Reversal through the back door. She smirked. Quiet power always beats loud protest. I formed LK Holdings LLC, Lisa and Kerrigan, through an online portal at exactly 9:37 p.m. It cost $138 in filing fees. The next day, I met the loan officer at the Bank of Western Carolinas. The folder in front of him read, Birchwood Lake, HOA, delinquent 31 days. Technically, we can sell the note if the borrower's 30 days past due, he said. Are you an interested party? Through my entity, I replied. We manage local maintenance assets. That was true enough for paperwork. By August 18th, LK Holdings officially owned the HOA's $62,000 debt, with all corresponding collateral rights. The collateral description included their reserve account and assessment receivables. In plain English, I now had the legal right to collect what they collected, or call the note if they defaulted further. I tucked the assignment into a fireproof box and locked it with Lisa's old brass key. That night, the lake air smelled like rain and metal. I stood on the deck watching lightning flash behind the pines, thinking about leverage. The first reversal was alive, humming quietly beneath the boards. Margaret didn't know it yet. She was still busy performing control theater. The next day, I received a notice of hearing for revocation of community access. The meeting was set for August 28th. Perfect timing. I needed a public stage. Meanwhile, the harassment ticked up again. Anonymous leaflets on mailboxes reading, Protect Property Values, Stop the Engineer. Someone even created a fake Facebook page accusing me of anti-community behavior. I kept screenshots, URLs, and timestamps, all printed and notarized by Jerome at City Hall. He looked at the pile one afternoon and chuckled between wheezes. You realize you're building a documentary, right? Just making sure the truth has footnotes, I said. Let me throw this out there. $250, $500, $1,000 fines. Where do you draw the line between injustice and revenue scheme? Drop your limit in the comments, or at least like the video so we can measure how many of us think enough's enough. The next week crawled by. I went to work, kept my head down, pretended to ignore the glares at the grocery store. Birchwood Lake was small. Rumors spread faster than pollen. A few neighbors whispered encouragement, but most stayed neutral. Fear does that. HOAs thrive on silence. One afternoon, Mrs. Delgado shuffled over with a plate of empanadas. For strength, she said. They don't like what you're doing. I'm not doing anything illegal, I said. She nodded. That's why they're scared. When the meeting day came, the humidity felt thick enough to chew. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects. Margaret opened with her usual preamble about protecting harmony, then launched into her complaint against me. Multiple instances of non-compliance, disruptive conduct, and verbal intimidation. I waited until she finished, then placed the stack of printed assignments on the table. Madam President, I said evenly, before we continue, I need to disclose a financial relationship with the association. She frowned. Excuse me? I'm now the holder of Birchwood Lake HOA's operating loan, acquired from Bank of Western Carolinas as of August 18th. By statute, any action that materially affects the association's solvency requires creditor notification. That's me. The silence was absolute. Someone dropped a pen. It clattered like a gunshot. Margaret blinked, color draining from her face. That's not possible. I slid the certified assignment across the table. You can verify with the bank. I'm sure they'll confirm. Ron muttered, You're bluffing. I smiled. Then call the number on the letterhead. That was reversal number 1. Quiet, clean, irreversible. For the first time, Margaret didn't have a line reuse. Audi. The meeting adjourned in confusion, homeowners buzzing like hornets. I walked out into the night air, rain finally breaking over the lake. Later, in my truck, I opened the window and let the smell of wet pine wash over me. I wasn't celebrating yet. Power is dangerous, even when you earn it. Elise called, voice low. You just put them in check, Dan. Next move's theirs. Document everything, stay calm, and don't announce the reform you want until they come to you. I told her I'd try, but part of me wanted to push faster, to end it before they found another angle. Still, patience wins wars. I went home, brewed coffee, and began drafting a timeline labeled Countdown to Reform. 10 days. The next morning, a fresh citation arrived. Unauthorized signage, no trespassing. The irony nearly made me laugh. They were losing control, and people always doubled down when cornered. Through the window, I saw Margaret pacing her porch, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing sharply. The world looked smaller from up here, her authority, her rules, her house of cards swaying in the storm that was about to break. 2 days after the storm, the retaliation came harder than ever. A certified envelope waited in my mailbox. Bold red stamp, final notice, before lien. They claimed I owed $2,650 in accumulated fines and administrative penalties. The signature line bore both Margaret's and Ron's names. They still hadn't realized that every signature they added was another nail in their own coffin. Elise called it predictable escalation. They'll panic before they break, she said, tapping her pen against the desk. Don't react, just document. Every overreach strengthens your next step. Still, their tactics were getting meaner. The HOA's Facebook group turned into a rumor mill. Someone posted that I'd been seen yelling at children near the lake. I hadn't even been outside that afternoon. When I replied with time-stamped footage proving otherwise, the post vanished and I was banned from the page. That night, a neighbor I barely knew whipped. Spared through the fence. They told us you were under investigation. I laughed, a low, tired sound. By whom? Myself? I kept my voice calm, but inside something coiled tighter. The line between annoyance and fear blurred when I found muddy boot prints on the back porch one morning. The deck light was unscrewed. The camera wire was cut. I replaced it within the hour, this time hiding the feed to an encrypted drive. Jerome came by with a thermos in his familiar rasp. You holding up, man? I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't. Just tired of pretending sunlight's protection. He nodded. You're doing what most people won't, standing firm with receipts. Keep your head down till the hearing. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by folders, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Lisa's picture leaned against the salt shaker, her smile faint in the lamplight. I don't know if I'm protecting this place or haunting it, I whispered, but the answer came easy. Both. Let me ask you all something. How far should an HOA go before it crosses into harassment? Do late-night wellness checks and boot prints count? Or do we just call that oversight? Tell me where your line is. The countdown file hit day 6. I'd already sent formal notice to the HOA via certified mail. All future communications regarding finances must be directed to LK Holdings, lien holder of record. Their silence was delicious, but I knew quiet wasn't surrender. It was plotting. Sure enough, on day 4, the county inspector showed up. Anonymous tip about unpermitted wiring, he said, apologetic. I invited him in, offered coffee, and showed every code-compliant outlet. He signed off with a grin. Whoever called this in wasted my afternoon, he said. I smiled back. You can log that as resolved. Knowledge nugget number 4. False reports to enforcement agencies for private dispute. This can constitute harassment under municipal ordinances and, if traced, may expose the caller to civil liability. That night, Elise texted, "Don't underestimate them. When people lose power, they'll burn the stage before giving up the spotlight." She was right. 2 nights later, my tires were slashed. 4 of them, neat diagonal cuts, silent message. The deputy who came to take the report sighed. "You want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "Just note it happened." I replaced the tires, added the invoice to my binder under retaliation costs. Every dollar was evidence. Every act of spite, another entry. By day 2, the HOA sent a mass email calling an emergency meeting to address ongoing community disruptions. Translation: they were building their final offensive before the debt matured. I wanted them desperate. I wanted them loud. That same afternoon, I caught Mrs. Delgado at her mailbox. "They're saying you'll take over the whole board," she said, voice trembling. "Not take over," I told her. "Just make it fair again." She smiled sadly. Fair's a rare thing. When she walked back to her porch, I noticed her ramp had a new sticker. Notice of violation. I peeled it off myself, slid it into my binder, and whispered, "Evidence number 42. The next day, I received an unsigned envelope with a single sentence typed in all caps. "Stop before someone gets hurt." I held it up to the light, saw the faint watermark of the HOA letterhead. Fear burned off into clarity. They were beyond reason now. That night, I sat on the deck, laptop open, drafting the public presentation. Every exhibit numbered, every clause cited. I'd chosen September 1st, the loan's maturity date, for the showdown. Same day their emergency meeting was scheduled. A clean collision of law and arrogance. Jerome read over my slides and laughed softly. "Man, this is art. Bureaucratic art. Think it'll hold? It'll hold like concrete." Before he left, he patted my shoulder. "You've got the leverage, Dan. Now mod. It count." The sky smelled like rain again, but this time it felt cleansing, not threatening. I looked out across the lake, the clubhouse lights glowing like a target. My heart beat steady. The first reversal was locked. The storm was rolling in for the public set piece. By the morning of September 1st, the air itself felt like static, thick, charged, humming with everything unsaid. The community center parking lot was already packed when I arrived, folding chairs set in uneven rows, residents clutching coffee cups like shields. Rain had slicked the gravel, leaving a mirror sheen that reflected porch lights and police headlights alike. Yes, a cruiser sat near the entrance, standard security for contentious meetings. The neutral authority I'd hoped for had arrived on its own. Inside, Margaret stood near the podium, her hair sprayed into a lacquered helmet, her smile stretched thin enough to tear. "Mr. Kerrigan," she said as I entered, "you'll have 3 minutes for your remarks." "I won't need more than 2, I said, sliding the case file onto the table beside her stack of papers. The meeting opened with the usual ritual: roll call, quorum verification, recitation of the community's values. Then she cleared her throat and announced, "Agenda Item 4, revocation of privileges and imposition of special assessment." That was my cue. I rose slowly, the binder in my left hand, the small digital recorder in my right. North Carolina's a one-party consent state. Documentation was fair game. I clicked it on, just loud enough for the mic to catch the sound. "Before any vote," I said, "I have a financial disclosure and a matter of compliance to present." Margaret tried to cut me off. "This is not the time." "It's exactly the time," I said, sliding the certified loan assignment across the podium. As of last month, LK Holdings became the secured creditor of this associate. TN's operating loan. That means any attempt to impose additional debt or assessment without creditor consent violates your covenant and exposes the board to immediate default. Murmurs swelled. The vice president leaned over the table, whispering furiously. I could feel 30 sets of eyes swinging from her to me like a pendulum. "And," I continued, "per statute 47F3(1) and 18, failure to maintain accurate records or misuse of common funds may trigger state review." I flipped the binder open to a page of highlighted transactions. "Here's your maintenance charge for a non-existent lake path. Here's your self-notarized assignment. Here's your falsified inspection claim." Margaret's voice cracked. "You can't prove intent." I looked straight at her. "Intent isn't required for restitution, just evidence." The officer near the back shifted his weight and spoke up. "Ma'am, might be best to let him finish." That single sentence froze her mid-protest. The crowd murmured approval. Even those who'd once backed her sensed the turn. I held up a clear folder containing the survey report. "Here's the GPS plot confirming the easement ends 2.6 feet before my deck. Every citation citing encroachment is invalid. Every fine tied to it is void. You've been collecting unlawful fees." Ron slammed his palm against the table. "You think you can humiliate us?" I shook my head. "No, Mr. Hensley. I think you humiliated yourselves when you forgot to read your own filings." A low gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Delgado sat in the second row, tears welling as she whispered, "Finally." I turned the final page to reveal a printed check stub, $62,000 principal balance. marked paid in full. And as of this morning, I said, the note is satisfied. Your debt is cleared, but your lender, me, still holds the record, which means I can now enforce the covenants I choose. That line landed like a thunderclap. Margaret sagged back into her chair, and for a moment the only sound was the rain tapping the windows. The officer nodded once, then addressed the crowd. All seems lawful here. Proceeding according to statute. Neutral validation, caught on recording. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the metal awning as homeowners spilled into the lot. Someone whispered, "Did he really buy the loan?" Another said, "He owns the board now." I didn't correct them. Let rumor carry my leverage further than my voice could. Elise texted me minutes later. Perfect delivery. Now let them stew. Next step, reform, not revenge. Let me ask you folks watching this. When you catch corruption red-handed, do you go public immediately or let them twist in silence first? What's the smarter play in your book? By nightfall, Margaret had emailed the entire community claiming temporary leadership suspension due to personal reasons. Translation: she was cornered. The vice president scheduled an emergency election for the following week. My inbox flooded with neighbors volunteering to help audit records. But I wasn't naive. Power vacuums attract opportunists faster than reformers. That's why I spent the next 48 hours drafting my proposal, an agreement that would trade my leverage for lasting structural change. Elise helped me shape the language. Jerome helped me vet the compliance points. We called it the Birchwood Transparency Charter. Still, the fight wasn't over. 2 board loyalists started circulating a petition to remove disruptive influence. They wanted to call a special vote to void my membership. It wouldn't hold legally, but it could fracture the community again. I needed one more push, one act that forced everyone to confront the truth at once. The plan was already taking shape. A press invitation, a small podium, and a box labeled evidence. The date, September 6th. The place, the same community hall where it began. September 6th broke clear and sharp, the kind of morning that smells like cut grass and reckoning. By 8 o'clock, the community hall was already filling. Homeowners, a couple of local reporters from the Henderson Ledger, even a representative from the state's Community Association division with a clipboard and calm eyes. The same police officer from before stood near the door again, arms crossed, nodding politely at each new arrival. I'd set the podium just left of center, rain-beaded microphone glinting beneath the fluorescence, the evidence box resting beside it. Every document numbered, tabbed, sealed. Behind me hung the HOA's banner, Birchwood Lake, pride in our community. Irony has a sense of humor. Margaret arrived last, pale, jaw tight, a folder clutched to her chest like a shield. She tried to pass through the crowd unnoticed, but whispers trailed her like wind through leaves. When the clock struck 9, I stepped forward. "Good morning, my name's Daniel Kerrigan. For those who still don't know, I'm a homeowner here, a civil engineer, and as of last month, the satisfied creditor of Birchwood Lake's operating loan. Today isn't about revenge, it's about transparency." The room hushed. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. I held up a single page, Margaret's self-notarized assignment from 2015, and laid it on the podium. This document, signed by both president and spouse, created a conflict of interest that voided every subsequent financial decision made under it. The law is simple. Fiduciaries can't certify their own contracts. A rustle of gasps, camera clicks. The state representative took notes. Next, I pulled out the maintenance invoice for $18,750. This charge, billed to all of you, covered work on land the HOA doesn't own. Here's the county map, stamped and certified. Here's my survey. And here, I flipped to a page, is the line they crossed. Leiterers, ally. The officer moved closer to the stage, scanning faces as if anticipating trouble. Ron stood near the back, his arms crossed so tight his knuckles whitened. "Now, before anyone says this is just about me," I continued, "look at Mrs. Delgado's case. A $1,020 fine for a wheelchair ramp. That's selective enforcement and a violation of federal accessibility standards." The crowd murmured louder now. Shock, anger, vindication. I caught Mrs. Delgado's small, trembling smile. Margaret finally snapped. "You've destroyed this neighborhood with your accusations," she shouted. "Do you think people will thank you for turning them against their own board?" I met her gaze. "They won't thank me," I said. "They'll thank the truth." I turned to the state rep. "Under statute, I'm submitting these documents as evidence of mismanagement, conflict of interest, and retaliatory enforcement. I'm also notifying the insurer of potential bond claim exposure." He nodded once. "Received." That was the domino's first tilt. The reporter's camera flashed. The officer's radio crackled. The board's attorney, a nervous man sweating through his collar, whispered to Margaret, then quietly excused himself from the hall. Within 15 minutes, the narrative had flipped completely. Homeowners began speaking, stories of minor fines, intimidation, fake notices. One woman read aloud an email from Ron threatening to reconsider access privileges. Another produced screenshots of deleted posts. The list grew, voices layering like rainfall until the board table looked like a shoreline disappearing under tide. When the noise settled, I raised my hand. "There's a way forward," I said. "I'm not calling for punishment, though there will be accountability. I'm calling for reform." I pulled a blue binder from the evidence box, the Birchwood Transparency Charter. Term limits, open meeting requirements, in bolded, dependent ethics oversight, annual third-party audits, and fee rollback to pre-2018 rates. "I'll relinquish creditor control once this charter is adopted." Margaret tried a last stand. "You're extorting us." "No," I said softly. "I'm offering you a lawful exchange, reform for relief, community for control." The officer stepped closer to the mic. "Everything stated here is voluntary and within civil authority. If both parties sign, it's binding." That line was the second validation, neutral, official, recorded. A man in the third row stood. "I motion we accept the charter." Another voice seconded. The vote wasn't even close, 21 in favor, 2 opposed. When the hands lowered, Margaret's face collapsed into a mix of shock and fury. The officer watched as she scribbled her signature on the charter, the ink dragging under her shaking hand. "For the record," he said, "the reform agreement is signed at 9:47 a.m., September 6th. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then growing until the hall filled with it. It wasn't celebration, it was relief. After the meeting, reporters gathered outside. Someone asked me how it felt to win. I said, "It isn't a win until the next person doesn't have to fight this fight." Let me throw this to you all. What's the right punishment for HOA officials who trespass, harass, or misuse power? Should it be fines, removal, criminal charges? Drop your answer below. Accountability only works if we agree on the cost. As I packed up the evidence box, Margaret and Ron slipped out the side door, faces pale as chalk. The officer gave me a small nod. "You kept it clean," he said. "That was the only way it mattered," I replied. The sun broke through the clouds as I stepped outside, light spilling over the lake like forgiveness. For the first time in months, I could breathe. But this story wasn't finished yet. The reforms had been signed. Now they had to survive implementation. And every reform worth its ink invites one last test. The following week unfolded like a slow sunrise. Quiet, cautious, almost tender. The HOA office, once buzzing with gossip and edicts, now smelled of new toner and uncertainty. Margaret had resigned formally for health reasons. Ron followed 2 days later, citing emotional stress. The insurance carrier confirmed suspension of the association's bond, pending investigation of fiduciary breaches. The news made the Ledger's front page under the headline, "Community Restores Integrity After HOA Scandal." Jerome stopped by my cabin with 2 coffees and that wheezy laugh of his. "You did it, Dan. Never seen bureaucrats move that fast without caffeine or subpoenas." I grinned. "It's not over yet." He raised an eyebrow. "Always the engineer, checking the stress loads even after the bridge holds." "Someone has to," I said. The new interim board held its first open meeting under fluorescent light that felt almost merciful. Every chair was filled, but the tension had softened into curiosity. Mrs. Delgado rolled in beside me, her ramp officially approved. The new president, a soft-spoken veteran named Harold Lytle, read aloud the adopted Birchwood Transparency Charter. The clauses echoed exactly what we'd fought for. 2 term limits for board members, mandatory third-party audits each fiscal year, public posting of all meeting minutes and budgets, Open access to association records without intimidation. Fee rollback by 15% for the next 12 months. As he finished, people actually applauded, lightly, respectfully, like a community exhaling together. Afterward, Elise joined me outside. You could have sued them, you know. Probably won damages. I shook my head. I didn't want to own their ruin, just their reform. She smiled. Then you got exactly what you came for. We stood by the lake, the ripples catching late sunlight. Somewhere across the water, the empty Hensley house reflected the glow like a mirror without memory. Let me take a second to talk directly to you watching this. If you believe I fought the right way, and that this is how accountability should look, say a few words below for someone who needs courage to start their own fight. Subscribe so you catch the next story when it breaks. And share this one. Awareness is the only tool that keeps power honest. That part's on us. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes kept falling. The county ethics office opened a file. The HOA's insurer denied renewal pending compliance review. The Hensleys quietly sold their property and moved 3 towns over. Meanwhile, Birchwood Lake began to heal in small ways. Kids playing at the dock again, porch lights staying on later, people waving instead of whispering. The most surprising change came in the form of an envelope on my doorstep, handwritten, unmarked. Inside was a note from a neighbor I'd barely known. Thank you for giving us our neighborhood back. I folded it into the same binder that had once held citations and lies. Now it held reforms, receipts, and a single photograph. Lisa and me, standing on the half-built deck, sawdust in her hair, laughter frozen in sunlight. That evening, I burned the last violation notice in the fire pit behind the cabin. The paper curled, blackened, and drifted upward like a spirit finally released. In the final audit report, stamped by the state, one line stood out. Association is now in full compliance. No pending violations. For a man who spent months under siege, those words felt better than victory. They felt like closure. As for me, I stayed on as volunteer chair for the new ethics committee. Just enough involvement to ensure the foundations we rebuilt wouldn't crack again. When the lake froze that winter, I walked out onto the dock, the boards solid beneath my boots, and thought about how justice sometimes sounds like silence, like peace returning, to a place that forgot it could exist. If you're still with me, remember this. Law without heart is tyranny. Heart without law is chaos. The balance is the fight. The following spring, the community hosted its first open day. Music, local vendors, kids with paint on their faces, laughter echoing against the hills. On the podium, the new sign read Birchwood Commons, open to all. That was visual beat number 3. Sunlight glinting off a polished brass plaque, Lisa's name engraved on the lower edge, in memory of those who built with love. And when the last song faded and people began packing up, I found myself smiling at the quiet again. The good kind. The earned kind. Next case? Maybe somewhere another neighborhood is learning the same lesson, that no rulebook is stronger than the truth written in plain daylight.